Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Stamperia Sunflower Art Mini Album Tutorial Series designed for Scrap and Create. If you are just joining me in the tutorial series, there is a complete supply list video showing you all the products that you will need to make this project. However, you can also click on the links in the description box below for all of the products that are available on the Scrap and Create website. So check those links out, purchase those products, and follow along. In the last video, we built up the base of the page and the bottom flap. Today, we're going to be starting here on the top flap, and then we'll move into this side. First, we're going to cut two pieces that measure 4 5/8 by 8 inches. We're going to score on the 4 5/8 inch side on both pieces, 1/2 inch on the left of one, and 1/2 inch on the right of the other. Then I'm going to take my scissors and miter the corners on each of my tabs, and then I will fold on these 4 lines and burnish using my bone folder. With these flaps, we're going to place one on each side. So I want to make sure that these are going to fit before I adhere them down. So I'm going to line one up with this side and one up with the right side and make sure that they will meet in the middle but not overlap. If your pieces will not meet without hanging over the edge, you want to just trim very slightly until these will meet and be perfectly lined up with one another. My pieces look okay, so I'm going to go ahead and adhere them down. So I'm just going to add my adhesive first to one of these tabs and then I'll adhere it. But I'm going to make sure that whenever I do this, once I have this one on, I'm going to come over here and again realign this and make sure it's in the correct position. You can also use your ruler and measure and then draw a line down that middle of the flap if you really want to, and then line that up too to make sure that you have it perfectly aligned. I'm going to add my adhesive to my second flap. And now I'm going to place this one, the edge first, and then make sure that it is even. And there's a little tiny gap, which is actually really perfect. A little gap is fine, you just don't want an overlap. Once I have that down, I'm going to go ahead and open up and burnish this down. So now I have my large flaps that will open out. We're going to add some pieces for here. For these pieces, I have 2 of them. They both measure 4 1/2 by 8 1/4. Now I'm going to be using my edge die. So I'm going to first mark the center on the 8 1/4 inch side on both pieces. And then I'm going to use my die just like we did previously, making sure that the curved edge is lined up with the top edge and my center is lined up with the center of that first little circular cutout piece down here. Then I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to flip this over here and do the same thing on this side. Once I have my decorative edge cut for one of the pieces, I'm going to turn this and score the end at 1/2 inch. Now I was originally planning on making these pockets diagonal pockets, but I have decided that I don't like the way that this looks on a diagonal, so I'm just going to keep them straight. So I did go ahead and trim this one. I trimmed 1 3/8 of an inch off of the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and score this at 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to miter these corners on both pieces, and then we're going to fold on those score lines and attach them to our page underneath the flaps. So we're going to start with the larger flap first. I'm going to place this on my page. Before I glue it down though, I need to make sure that both of these doors are going to close without it puckering. So if it feels like it's going to pucker at all, we're going to trim this. Mine doesn't really feel too bad, but I'm just going to slightly trim just to be sure. And I'm just going to take my scissors because it's so minimal, but you can use your paper trimmer like I showed you on the previous pages where I've done this. So now I know for sure that it will close and there won't be any issue. I'm going to take my adhesive and apply only to this 1/2 inch tab section. And then I'm going to line this score line up with the bottom edge of my page, and also making sure that it's lined up with the bottom edge of those flaps so that it is completely hidden when those flaps are closed. Then I'm going to adhere this down. Now taking my second piece, I'm going to place it on top. Once again, I'm going to close my flaps to make sure that they will actually close. It looks okay. If you need to, go ahead and trim it. Then we're going to take adhesive and apply it to the 1/2 inch tab section. And now we're going to line up the score line on this piece right on top of the score line of the first piece, so they are stacked. Making sure that the edges here are stacked, and one more time before you do that, making sure that it will close and then burnish it down. And now we're just going to, again, put notes on that to turn those pages into pockets after the decorative paper is on it. I'm also going to wait to cut the photo mats until later. So I am just going to keep this how it is. And then I may actually build up something on the front cover here. I just haven't decided yet. We will get to that once we pick out the papers. So we now have this done. We have that one finished. We're going to begin on the front of this one. And I'm going to just press this down a little bit so that it will lay a little bit flatter for me when I go to work on it. Next, I have one piece that measures 6 inches by 8.5. And on the 8.5 inch side, we're going to score at the top at 1/2 inch. Now I am going to take this and mark this in the center. Using my decorative die, I am going to place it right in the center of my piece, lining up my top edges. And I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine. Once I remove the die, I'm going to then use my scissors just to cut those little ends. So I have my decorative edge now on the bottom. And I'm going to miter these corners, then fold on my score line. For the next piece, it measures 7 inches by 7.5 inches. On the 7-inch side, we are going to score this at 1/2 inch and 6.5 inches. Then we're going to turn, and on the 7.5 inch side, score at 1/2 inch. Now use your scissors to miter the corners and cut through the bottom corners to remove that excess paper. Next, I'm going to take my ruler and mark in the center at the top, and I'm going to bring my decorative edge in and use it to cut the top, lining up in the center and then lining up the edge of the die with the edge of the page. I will run this through my die cutting machine. On this one, I am going to re-angle my corners and clip it. So I'm just going to angle that down and then to my edge. And now I'm going to fold over on my score lines to form a pocket. I have my first piece with the tab on the top. I've got my pocket that I'm going to place here like this. And I am going to place this so that the edge of my pocket is about 5/8 of an inch from the top edge. So I'm just gonna mark that. I'm gonna take my adhesive and apply it to my 1/2 inch tabs. So it'll be a pocket on top of a flap. And then we'll add this to our page. I'm gonna turn this around so it's a little easier for me to see. Sometimes when you're doing things on camera, it can be really hard, especially trying not to get your head in the frame. So it's a little easier just to turn it around. Then I'm going to use my bone folder to burnish this down. And so we have our pocket here and our flap. I'm going to mark my album here in the center so I know where to place my flap. So I'm marking this 3 inches off each side from the center, and I will place this right at the top so that the score line on my flap is at the top edge of my flap here, or my page, I guess I should call it. So I'm going to line everything up, and I'll use my bone folder to press everything down. Then I'm going to open this and press this. I have 2 pieces that measure 4 inches by 5 inches. On the 4-inch side, we're going to score 1 piece at 1/2 inch on the right-hand side. And on the second piece, we're going to score it 1/2 inch on the left-hand side. Then I'll go ahead and miter these corners here and fold on these score lines. I'm going to open up that flap we just put on, and now I'm going to take my 2 flaps and place them in the center here on each side. These ones will overlap, not like the ones on the front. that closed together. First, I'm going to mark where to place this, and I am going to try to get this to be somewhat centered. So I'm gonna eye it first and see where it looks good, and then, yeah, so I'm going to measure 1 1/4 inch up from the bottom. And I'm going to mark there, and that's where I'm going to place my flaps. So it'll be somewhat centered, but not completely. It'll be kind of hard just because of that decorative edge. So I'm just going to use this as my way of placing my flaps. Now I'm going to be careful with this one. I probably should have put this on before I put the flap on, but that's okay. So I'm going to put it on like that, and then I'm going to use my bone folder to run it flat from this side so I can hold my fingers in here and have a pretty decent surface to work with. Then I'm going to take my second flap and add my adhesive. Going to line up my top and bottom edges of this flap with the opposite flap, making sure that the score line is lined up with the edge. And then I'm going to use my bone folder to press this down. So now I have my 2 flaps, my larger flap, and my pocket. The last piece measures 8 1/4 by 5 inches. On the 5-inch side, we're going to score it 1/2 inch on the bottom, and then use the scissors to miter those corners. Fold on that score line. Then I already did this. I marked in the halfway point on my top edge. I'm going to use my decorative edge die, lining up the scalloped edge with the top edge of my flap, and lining up the center with the center of this first cutout. Now I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to do this side too. Now that I have my piece cut, I'm going to flip open the flap. This is going to go here down at the bottom. You want to make sure that it does fit on the page. If it's a little bit larger, go ahead and trim that down. I'm going to add my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab on my piece. Then I'm going to line up the score line with the bottom edge of the page. Then I'm going to write myself a note that this is going to be turned into a pocket. Once this paper's down, I will place adhesive here and create a pocket there. We will add some inserts into this later, but again, I'm not going to make those until we're ready. So that is it for this part of the album. Don't forget, if you are just joining me for the tutorial series and you want to follow along and make this album, all of the products are linked in the description box below that are available for purchase on the Scrap and Create website. See you in the next video.